Now,
Good.
we go.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Topher, and it is an absolute thrill to be here with none other than former Queensland Premier Campbell Newman. How are you?
I'm great, and look, thanks for doing this. This is fantastic.
Look, this is just one of the upsides of me doing my road trip. Anyone that follows me, you'll know I'm on a road trip heading up from Victoria through New South Wales up to Brisbane. We went the inland way, which was the original plan, but with all the rain, the floods, everything else turned out to be just fortuitous as well. We are going to try and make our way down the coast, and we'll see how we go. But I thought, given that obviously there's a huge amount of devastation right now, flooding, some real heartache, sadly some lives lost, etc., we were told that Tim Flannery, of course, famously told us that the rains that we have weren't going to fill our dams anymore, that we weren't going to see these sorts of events. You, in 2014, towards the end of your tenure as Premier, if my memory serves me correctly, you were saying quite the opposite, that in fact we needed to take measures to stop this sort of thing from happening again. Tell me about that.
Well, look, we absolutely, in December 2014, announced after about a sort of 8 or 9 month program of looking at options and a pre-feasibility study, we said there are some options that will help mitigate future floods in Brisbane. One of them was raising Wivenhoe Dam. There are other options that we wanted to put in place that control creeks and rivers that flowed into the Brisbane River below Wivenhoe, because the bottom line, mate, is that this city has always been a flood-prone place. Prior to white settlement, the oral history of Aboriginal people talk of floods that are even larger than anything that's been since 1825. So what really gets up my goat is when I start hearing politicians talk about unprecedented, records, all this sort of stuff. You've got that oral history, but you've also got, if you go and do drilling, and I'm a former civil engineer, if you go and do core sample drilling across these catchments, you will find that in the last 3,000 or 4,000 years there's been cataclysmic floods exceeding anything that we've seen. So it ain't climate change, it's just these are the extremes of the weather systems that you get on rare occasions, but you do get these sorts of events.
It does always mystify me when people say unprecedented when we have a whopping maybe 200 years of weather history in Australia. We have no idea what's unprecedented.
Topher, we've got no idea. And look, try this one. When I was a young civil engineer in the Army, in 1986, I went to a presentation in Sydney by the then Water, Sewage and Drainage Board, who talked about the work that they were doing on those core drilling type exercise I just mentioned, west of Parramatta on the black soil plains through to Penrith. So they were presenting the results of those studies that were done in sort of the early 80s. And they had found that in the last 5,000 years, there'd been floods out there that would almost cover all the rooftops between Penrith and Parramatta.
Wow.
Now, you never hear about that. Prior to the Industrial Revolution and pumping CO2 in the atmosphere, there were floods that, would today people would be carrying on about them being unprecedented, would have and had nothing to do with, our civilization. So, the bottom line is back then, the water people were saying we need to strengthen a Warragamba Dam, and we need to also look at options for flood mitigation. I believe they did some work on strengthening the dam, but you know what? Nothing on flood mitigation. The argument continues today. And then we get people like Tim Flannery sort of spouting this stuff, so nothing happens, So it is ridiculous, the rut we're in this country.
All right, so we can't spend all our time on that. You've gone from being a Liberal Party Premier to you're now the lead Senate candidate in Queensland running for federal parliament. For the Liberal Democrats. Now, for anyone that doesn't know, the Liberal Democrats and the Liberal Party are not the same thing. Arguably, and feel free to disagree with me, I would argue that the Liberal Democrats today are probably what Robert Menzies intended for the Liberal Party to be. That would be my personal view on it, and feel free to disagree. But tell me about that transition, that journey from being a very successful, you climbed that greasy pole all the way to the top. You got to that top job of being the Premier under one of the major political parties in Australia. Now you're running for lead Senate candidate for a party that many people have never even heard of. Why?
Well, it is a case of, I think, the Liberal Party moving to the left and abandoning the values that I had always expected them to uphold. And it's in their sort of charter, if I can call it that. So I was involved from the age of 12. So both my parents were involved in federal coalition governments. My mum with the Howard government as a minister, senior minister, and my dad in the 1970s and early 80s with Malcolm Fraser. So, I go back to my first political experiences of handing out how to votes in 1975 at the age of 12. There, I'm telling you my age here, everybody. It's 59 this year.
Oh, goodness.
So look, I'm sort of true blue liberal originally, but the last 7 years since I left office in Queensland, firstly we've seen the state LNP, Liberal National Party, run away from their time in government. Yes, mistakes were made. Yes, we had a few too many fights. But we lost with a primary vote of 41.3%, which was essentially almost the same primary vote as Morrison got when he won in 2019. But what they did is they said they've run away from their record. No longer do they believe, I think, in small government, low taxes, balanced budgets, support for small business, keeping the debt down, letting people get on with their lives. And they've gravitated to supporting the Labor Party, curled up a little ball Topher like, well, don't hurt us. We weren't there with that Newman guy. He was the bad bastard. So there's that. But then we've sat through 2 years of COVID where Scott Morrison, who I used to admire, has gone from there to the doghouse as far as I'm concerned.
I'm with you.
Because, again, he hasn't stood up for the values of the Liberal Party. A Liberal Prime Minister shouldn't condone a Victorian police service shooting baton rounds and firing pepper spray at protesters, or many of the terrible things that the Andrews government has done. And finally, that was the crunch for me. I left.
Can I add? I think that the thing that I just shake my head and feel ashamed when it comes to the federal government's response was locking Australians out of Australia.
Oh,
I mean, there is a deal that we make as Australians. We pay our taxes. We hold that Australian passport. We feel proud about being Australian. There are people who fight tooth and nail to get here and become Australians, and I just feel that we've been completely betrayed.
Oh, look, we have, and we've seen that betrayal of Australians who are trapped overseas. We've also seen, citizenship trash from the point of view. I mean, what is the purpose of an Australian passport that you can't use? I mean. Well, we know at the moment the only thing it's good for is just sort of being ID'd for the sort of the electronic surveillance state, which is another thing I know you probably want to talk about. But look, Morrison has allowed incredible reckless spending. He's never stood up when it comes down to civil liberties infringements perpetrated by premiers. The National Cabinet has actually been a free-for-all. We needed uniform national guidelines, principles, rules to get through this. Instead, it's just been, he's allowed Australia to fragment. I mean, I could go on for this whole interview just about the problems with what's been created. So I left. I'd had enough, and I like the Liberal Democrats because it's the libertarian philosophy, which is about trying to get government out of our lives, free to live the way we choose, me not saying to you, you should live this way or whatever, as long as we're not impacting on each other or the broader community. Get out of the way, government. Let us live our lives. Let us bring up our families. Let us bring up our kids in line with our values. Let us have free speech. Let us have low taxes and make the decisions about how we spend our money. That's me. I really like it.
That brings up a very serious question for me, though, because a part of this philosophy, yes, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, freedom of association, who we associate with, is a part of that. And one of the questions that a lot of people have, and I'm going to include myself in a lot of people because this went through my mind, is Campbell Newman, of course, as Premier of Queensland, supported and pushed through some anti-association laws aimed at bikies, aimed at arguably organised criminals. I know a lot of bikies, not all of them are organised criminals, I know that for a fact. How do you go from being the Premier that and how do you feel about that as your legacy? Do you stand by that as a part of your legacy? Have you changed? Would you do things differently now? Who is Campbell Newman now compared to that?
Well, I guess there's going to be a bit of a long answer, but I'll try and give it really quickly. So
I'm not in a hurry, so.
Okay, so the background is we had an event on the Gold Coast one Saturday night where two gangs did battle in a public place, sort of an upmarket restaurant area, scared women and children, those families just trying to enjoy a great night out. didn't stop the battle when the police arrived.
Yeah, right.
When people were arrested, then went and besieged a local police station and insisted their members get let out. And I, as Premier, had people from the left, by the way, demanding that I take action, strong action. So what happened was that the then Solicitor General, who's now the President of the Court of Appeal, and I would say that he's not actually my political side of the street as well.
Sure.
He's more of the left. I think that's a fair assessment. But he actually went and developed, his name's Walter Sofronoff, he actually developed these laws, came to the government and said, look, this is how you deal with this problem. So I make that point because a lot of times people have said, oh, you know, they were very right-wing, they were very draconian, and they were, but we'll come back to that. But I want people to know that it was developed by someone who has got one of the most senior judicial positions in Queensland. Yeah. So it wasn't cooked up by me, and that's, I'm not evading responsibility for it, I'm just saying that's the context to this. So what happened is we went after criminal motorcycle gangs. We put in place these laws. I really put a lot of pressure on the police to go after the gangs. It was very effective in that crime rates went down 15 to 20% and essentially ran them out of the state. They've come back since when the Labor Party repealed the laws. But my reflection's this. The first thing I really acknowledge on this question is that did we give the police too much power? Yes, we did. Okay. Was it misused by the police? My belief these days is yes, it was. Okay. How did that occur? That basically people just enjoying a Saturday afternoon motorbike riding were pulled over and given the nth degree, and that really cheesed them off. And, you know, that's an example of what happens when you do give too much power to a law enforcement agency. And what I've then seen in the last 2 years makes me really see that the approach was wrong. Okay. So I don't run away from the war against the criminal gangs. Sure. Okay, but I didn't need to do it this way. That's probably my view today. Okay. So I acknowledge the concerns that people have about those particular laws. I do make the point though that they did have sunset clauses, that they had to be renewed. A lot of people miss that. Yep. I've made the point that they were actually developed by somebody who is a very respected judge, and you know it's sort of, you know, that was put forward as a recommendation when he was Solicitor General. So I guess the way to have dealt with it, if it was today, what would I have done differently? Today I'd rely on the existing laws, and I'd simply say to the police, look, you've got a portfolio of laws, get off your butts. Go and do your job. Yeah. Use the intelligence that you have, the criminal intelligence, and I'd also have used the Crime and Corruption Commission to actually go, which we did as well at that time. But I'd have used them as well to actually go after the gangs, and I think we could have had exactly the same result without those laws. So long answer, as I said, but I hope that clarifies the situation. And by the way, and the trouble for me, just from a personal point of view, Topher, is that people have always gone, oh, as a result of that, they think I'm, you know, I love big government and strong laws. But, you know, the whole time I was in politics, whether I was Mayor of Brisbane or Premier, my response always when the media were clamouring for government to do something, as they always do these days, I'd go, well, do you really want more laws? I don't think we need any more laws. And I was a very reluctant lawmaker. I'm for actually getting rid of red tape and getting rid of laws. Doesn't sit well with the lad stuff. I know, I've got to acknowledge that, but that's that's who I really am. This I have not sort of suddenly become an anti-government libertarian. I've always been someone who was in government, actually fairly anti-government while I was there, anti-bureaucracy.
So I'm someone who's evolved from being a really hardcore conservative into a libertarian over time, and there's many things that I supported back in the day when, you know, Johnny Howard was third. There was God, there was Jesus, and then there was Johnny Howard. Okay. Anything that Johnny Howard said was gospel, was good enough for me. He said he needed to take the guns. Well, that's good enough for me. He said we needed to extend the superannuation provisions and make it bigger. Well, that's good enough for me. If he said we needed a baby bonus, it was good enough for me. And of course, I look back on all of those things now and I feel very, very differently about them. So
actually, I do too on a number of those.
Yeah, okay. So I'm not going to sit here in judgment of someone who looks back at something that they supported once upon a time and says, actually, that wasn't quite the right thing, because that's been my experience as well. And I think that should be the human experience. If we're paying attention as we live and we're learning, then we should be changing. So let's look forward now instead of back. You're now running as a lead Senate candidate for the Liberal Democrats. The Liberal Democrats have released this thing called the Freedom Manifesto. Now, the word manifesto is very loaded these days. It's been used in all kinds of horrible ways for people that have done some really horrible things. So put my mind at ease. What is in that manifesto?
Well, we might ask someone here to just... Carla?
Okay.
Carla, it's right there.
Okay, all right.
She's just out of frame. I'll wave it round. Thank you.
It comes with a folder and everything.
It is. There we go.
Yeah.
The Freedom Manifesto. So what is it? Well, I think firstly the use of the word manifesto is meant to provoke a quick reaction, and
mission accomplished.
The policy team of the Lib Dems, I think, did us proud by doing that. And of course, the other thing that gets people is who don't know about this is the Eureka Stockade.
The Eureka flag,
The Eureka Stockade was not the first branch meeting of the CFMEU. It was basically a collection of small business people, miners who were mining for gold in Victoria, who were up in arms, literally, against over-regulation and punitive taxation as they try to earn a living through the sweat of their own hard labour. So that's on the cover. So what is it? Well, it's a platform for this election, the 2022 election. It's got 10 policy areas. We're putting out very clearly what we stand for as libertarians. So it's not banal, it's not focus grouped, it's not safe. Some of the stuff in it, I go, but at the end of the day, it's meant to provoke, a real debate. So, it covers everything from how we would deal with COVID-19 through to freedom from surveillance, through to things for small business, the superannuation thing you mentioned before. There's a lot in it.
Yeah. So one of the things that I respect about Liberal Democrats, in full disclosure, I am now a financial member of the Liberal Democrats. I wasn't until about 2 months ago, but I signed up because I think this is a really important year, and the elections that are happening this year, South Australia, federal, and then Victorian state are all very, very important. So, disclaimer, I am a member. They don't pay me to do interviews, I pay them to be a member of the party, so make of that what you will. But one of the things I really appreciate about the Liberal Democrats is that they're not a one-issue party. They're not sitting there like maybe a marijuana legalisation party might be, or there are various parties that really try and play small ball. You guys seem to be going the other way. You're actually putting forward a full policy platform and being provocative with that.
Yeah.
How do you think that's going to play now with the state of politics? There's a lot of people waking up to politics for the first time because of COVID. How do you think this is going to perform as a platform for you guys?
Hard to say, actually. I think our biggest challenge is getting the message out, and that's clear in terms of the way that the mainstream media even treat me. Even with the former political positions I've had, the mainstream media in sort of the Brisbane, South East Queensland area have shown fairly minimal interest that I'm running and what I'm saying. So, not so in regional areas. So, I think the biggest challenge is getting the message out. But you raised a really important thing. I think I've been quite fair about this. If I look across the spectrum at all the minor parties out there, the Liberal Democrats are the only one with a proper policy suite across the board, covering multiple sort of areas of interest to voters and to our nation. So I think it's really important that people do have a look at what we're saying. So we're not just we want to look after shooters, for example. Nothing wrong with that, but we're more than that. So I think that's a very big thing. So I'd like people to go to the ldp.org.au website, and it's /freedom, and then see this. And in this election, I believe is going to be the most interesting one or contested one since '75, which I mentioned earlier. That was when Gough Whitlam was tossed out of office. And I say that because of the aftermath of COVID, because of what's been inflicted on us all over the last 2 years because of the impending significant inflation that is going to hurt the savings of Middle Australia, because of what's going on in the Ukraine and things like that right now. These are all. It's a really interesting and quite dynamic sort of election that we're going to see. So, you know, I think the time is right for people to look at minor parties, because if they just keep voting the way they have, if we keep voting, you know, it sounds like you used to, I certainly did, if we just keep voting for the Liberal National Party coalition, we'll get the same thing. And similarly, if you're a Labor voter, if you keep voting, you know, like, I mean, Topher, just to go sideways for you, if you keep voting as a blue-collar Labor worker, if you keep voting for them, particularly in Queensland, you're voting for people who are very sort of Sydney, Melbourne centric and don't understand that coal powers this state, and don't even want to look at what's happened, by the way, in recent days. Coal prices are through the roof. Our coal's never been in so much demand because no one wants to be vulnerable to the Russians.
That's right.
You know, like,
So you mentioned voting for minor parties. I completely agree. And I did a video recently. I'll just plug it briefly. It's called the How to Vote Using Marbles video. It shows how preferential voting works.
Fantastic, mate. That was that. By the way, thanks for doing that. That's had a really big positive reaction out there, because a lot of people, and that's why you did it, they don't understand how it works, and they think their vote's going to be wasted if they vote for a minor party, which isn't the case.
Or they still think that parties dictate where preferences go, etc., which used to be true but isn't anymore. So there's a bit of myth busting that needs to happen there. But let's be brutally realistic here. What do you think the chances are of the Liberal Democrats and or other, you know, more freedom-friendly minor parties that might at the very least have good policies when it comes to COVID? What are your prospects in the election? What's your best case scenario? And if you even achieve that, will it really actually make any sort of a difference? Is there a point? Are we wasting our time here?
Well, I'm delving into the role of a political commentator from and I'm not a commentator anymore. I'm now a candidate as well. But just to sort of try and faithfully answer your question, I guess just very quickly the prospects. If I start with Victoria, I think David Limbrick, who I know you well, who you and your viewers would know well, I think he's got a very good opportunity if those that have been rallying for freedom or anything to go by. In New South Wales, I think it's more challenging for John Ruddock, our lead Senate candidate there.
Good candidate, but a more difficult circumstance.
But there was less of an issue in terms of what happened. Well, there wasn't anything like the issue inflicted on the New South Wales population in terms of coercion and the authoritarian, you know, sort of response of government to COVID. So not the same ingredients, but John's giving a red hot go. Up here, it's a bit different again. Up here, we weren't really touched, you know, in the same way by COVID, and I don't mean to promote sweep sort of what's happened to small business and tourist industries, but just across the board, we didn't have to put up with what you put up in Victoria. But up here, you know, there are people have firm views on yours truly. There are people who don't like Campbell Newman. There are people who are big fans. I know that because they pull me up in the street and have asked me. You know, the last 6 or 7 years, people will pull me up in the street in the CCB and say, "Please come back." So I am. So that's their opportunity to get behind me. So I think, you know, there's a good chance there. You know, if we talk to the people and we get this manifesto out. So I think just the other part of your question is, what are we trying to achieve and can we achieve anything? Well, our objective, make no mistake, yes, we'd like to get some lower house candidates up as well, and we're working hard there, but we want to get a block in the Senate, Topher, of, say, you know, ideally 3, and we've got great candidates, like we've got Kenelm Tonkin in South Australia, Kate Sandinall in WA, so we've got some great candidates for the Senate, but if we could get at least 3 up, a block in the Senate who are going to say no to the constant move to the left, to drag, like John Humphrey's our president, likes to say this quite a bit, it's about ballast, it's about a bulwark against the left, or ballast, pinning things back to the right a bit when it comes to the finances and keeping government under control. That's what we want to achieve. So, for example, if I get there, one of the very first things that I want to do is introduce a private member's bill to overturn the ban on nuclear power in this country. Good. And that at least gets the debate properly going We need that.
I'd
So
support that.
there are things that we can do if we're canny, if we trade off our votes for actually, for certain pieces of legislation on the things that the Lib Dems want. So that I want, I want that ban on nuclear overturned.
Yep.
And that'll be in play with whoever's the government if I'm a senator.
Yeah. So there's a couple of interesting things that I just want to bring out very quickly, and I apologise because I'm interviewing you, but for context, a lot of what's happened in Australia over the last 20 years has been because the Greens have held either the balance of power or a significant block within the Senate. And they, of course, tend to want to go towards more spending, more government programs, these sorts of things. Realistically, I mean, that last Senate spot, you only need about 8% of the state's votes in order to claim that last Senate spot. I will do a video on how the Senate works at a later date so that everyone understands that. Do you believe it's possible for the LDP, or let's throw the LDP in with a couple of the other minor parties that I disagree with on certain policy areas, but are at least good on COVID, the UAP and One Nation, and if you were to get a block there, do you think it's realistic that you can actually have a bigger block than the Greens, or is that stretching too far, do you think, for this election?
Well, I think it's possible. So an outcome, say in Queensland, might be that the Liberal National Party lose one senator, and that and I've picked up that spot. That's a scenario that seems plausible. Pauline Hanson's got a strong following up here. I'm assuming she gets up again. You see, so Malcolm Roberts is not up for election for another 3 years. So that's feasible. I see the coalition losing ground in the Senate, the crossbench expanding, and the Labor Party, probably, and the Greens either holding where they are. Maybe the Greens coming back a notch or two. By the way, I think the Greens have really overreached. I think they're really showing their true colours now. They're not about the environment. They are literally watermelons. They are green on the outside, communist, red on the inside, and their policies of confiscation, when it comes to tax, and sort of redistribution of wealth. It is out of the communist playbook. And I ask you a question. How do you handle living in Melbourne alongside so many of them? How do we change the psyche of Melbourne?
I lived not only in Melbourne, I lived in Fitzroy for 4 years.
Oh my God!
I used to refer to it as living behind enemy lines. And I got roughed up a couple of times by people who would recognise me from my videos and that didn't take to my views very well.
Oh God!
So look, if Daniel Andrews wins again in November, I've been very public about this. My family and I will be looking to get out of Victoria, whether we stay in Australia or whether we actually go overseas, because we wanted to live overseas anyway.
Right.
It wouldn't be sort of flipping the table and right, we're out of here. It'd be a case of, well, this means maybe our opportunity to go and live overseas for a few years at least. But if Daniel Andrews wins again, I'm basically going to be declaring Victoria to be the California of Australia, right? California have been a one-party state for a very long time, and it does not matter how badly the Democrats screw up, they keep on getting re-elected.
Yeah.
And what that means is that they have just rushed in the direction of the Democratic agenda. In Victoria, we're rushing in the direction of the Labor Party agenda, and I think that that's incredibly destructive. And if that's what the people of Victoria want, well, we have a system where they can vote for that and they can give that to themselves. But we also have a system where I don't have to stick around and experience the consequences of that.
Well, it's interesting, by the way, post the sort of the stricter controls being unravelled, that the figures for net interstate migration show quite quite a large number of people departing, and they're coming here. So that's interesting.
And that's actually a worry for us in Victoria, who are trying to stay and trying to sway the next election, because a lot of the people leaving presumably would not have voted for Daniel Andrews, and we're actually losing some of those voters. So I'll be staying until the election so that I can cast my vote in what I hope will be a free and fair election, and at this point in time I expect it will be. I'm not expecting any issues there. And I would love to see Daniel Andrews turfed out. However, I think if the election was held right now, he would probably still be in power. But 9 months in politics is a very long time. And,
well, it is. And why don't we give some gratuitous advice to Matthew Guy and the lefty liberals? Listen, guys, it's like this. Don't do a Zach Kirkup in WA. You cannot out-green these people. You cannot out-left them, out-spend them. stick to the Liberal values, stick to small government, low taxes, balanced budgets. But if you don't want to do that, guess what? We in the Lib Dems, we're quite happy to go really hard at the next state election, and we're ultimately, Victoria will be a better place if there's strong voices for the things that actually make economies, that actually give us prosperity, because it ain't in terms of the way that the Liberals are talking these days, and they have, and as up here with David Crisafulli, the Liberals in Victoria have just rolled over and allowed the most terrible things to be inflicted upon community, on business, and they all stand condemned.
They have been tepid at best. Their absolute best efforts have been tepid.
Topher, these idiots look at polls and go, "Oh, the community support what's going on." Well, I can tell you now, just say in the Queensland example, if Crisafulli and the state opposition had relentlessly demonstrated to the community that the restrictions were illogical, draconian, inconsistent, almost capricious and not effective, they would have actually got somewhere. They would have actually improved their position, and they would have had their support base cheering them on. But they don't. I mean, by the way, like if we were in a public sort of place at the moment, when this interview's being done, we'd have to wear masks. But at 6 p.m. tonight, the masks go. Well, why 6 p.m. tonight? I mean, why not 10 a.m. today? Why not 6 p.m. yesterday or last week? I mean, what's the science? I mean, it's baloney. We know it's baloney.
The answer is always, well, they have to pick a time. Well, no, they don't.
Well, they could. Why didn't they stand up and pick a time the day they announced it would be, which was about a week and a half ago? Why didn't they actually say, well, today we're announcing gone?
Yeah.
Why couldn't they have done that for us?
But also, they have to pick a time. Well, hang on, they didn't have to make these rules.
No.
And this comes back to what you said very early on. This drive to do something. And we're at fault here. The governments that we have around Australia are the symptom. The problem is us and the voters and what we've actually supported.
Sadly, yeah.
And we keep saying to them, do something. And the political incentive is to do anything, no matter how ridiculous, because that's what we're demanding of them. Anyway, what I want to ask you, and this might be the last question, although I'm enjoying the chat, I'm just mindful of your time.
No, mate, let's keep rolling.
I get asked regularly to go into politics, and I say only semi-jokingly that why would I do that to myself? I want to actually do something useful with my life. Right? That's my kind of glib response when people say, oh, why don't you go into politics? You lived it. You saw the reality of the enemies that you get, the unfounded criticisms, the founded criticisms, etc. Being in that public eye, you had escaped. Why the hell are you going back?
Well, I do contemplate that all the time. Well, it might sound a bit old-fashioned, but I want to serve the community. I mean, my career is basically 13 years in the Army as an Army engineer, 10 years in business, in the grain handling industry mainly, but also working in coal and the electricity supply industry as a consultant. Then I did my time in politics, first as Lord Mayor, Leader of the Opposition, and then the Premier. Then I've had 7 years in business again. I've got a great business, great lifestyle, great business partners, really enjoy it. But, look, I really do worry about where the country's going. And, 7 years of watching the Liberal National Party abandon their values, 2 years of COVID mania, and mate, I've just said, look, I've got to take a stand. So, I just want to make a difference. So my objective is to get to Canberra and to serve the Queensland community, to get things for Queensland, but more than that, it's to actually get accountability. I want to hold the blowtorch to the politicians, but also the senior bureaucrats. I want to challenge, for example, the officers of Australian Border Force about why they think they can, when an Australian citizen inbound through one of our airports can have their phone taken off them, demand a PIN. Like, when did this become okay? And like that sort of stuff should be. If they want to do that, get a warrant from a judge. That's the sort of stuff I want to go after. So I want to serve the community. I'm just so. You can probably tell I'm pretty fired up about it. I am fired up about it, and look, my pitch to Queensland is look, you don't have to like me, but you know that I'm going to fight for you, and you won't always agree, but I'm going to I know the system. I've worked in senior level in politics. I know how public servants hide things in budgets. I know how they don't tell the truth and let the community know what's really going on. And I reflected on the Vlad stuff. I'm a pretty I'm a pretty high energy individual, and I will be relentless in prosecuting what's right for the community. That's why I that's my pitch to people.
Can I comment on this? You know, you're not necessarily going to be the nice guy. You don't necessarily want to be liked. I had this really surreal experience as we were approaching the Victorian election, as I just got into political commentary, and Ted Baillieu was up for election, and I was asking people, I know a number of people that know the family, and I would ask them, I'd say, oh, what's Ted like? Thinking that he might be our future Premier and hoping for the best, hoping that he was going to be, in my case, hoping that he was going to be another Jeff Kennett. And it became comical because the answer from every single one of them was identical, even though they didn't know each other and didn't know that I'd asked others. And they would do this. I'd say, you know, what's Ted Baillieu like? And they'd go, he's a nice guy, every single time. And it began to frustrate me and actually really worry me, because I don't want a nice guy in a premier, in a leader, in a politician. I don't want a go along to get along. You need someone that's actually going to stand up to the bullies, stand up to the people that want to control us, stand up to the people that have their own agendas and want to make money, you know, through the regulatory system. You actually need a bit of an asshole.
That's there's a few good things in that. I put it like this. I'm actually not an arsehole. I know there's a lot of people who think that I am, and you know the lad stuff, you know, gives them some reason to think that. But look, I'm a family man. I've always looked after my family. I've got great friends. The thing I'm trying to get across in this election is that I'm there for the community. I'm actually not there for myself. I'll take a pay cut if I become a senator. By the way, I did when I was Premier and Lord Mayor. I always earned less than the whole time I was there than I did in the private sector. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just saying it's not about money, and it's not about fame. It's about actually delivering for the community. And you know, as Lord Mayor and Premier, you actually got to be able to deliver stuff. This is a bit different. This is the delivery here is about accountability. It is about holding the feet of people in authority to the fire, holding them to account, because it's sorely lacking. Because we have these politicians from the major parties who, yes, they'll go through a charade of trying to seek accountability in those hearings that you see on the TV, but at the end of the day, it's really part of the tit for tat circus. It's like the coalition are in now, so the Labor people are talking it up big, but then when the teams change, it is changed. They're not really. It's not part of a long-term agenda to get accountability from the public sector, and it's sorely lacking.
Now, I've often said the major parties are unafraid of losing power to the other major party because they know that it's a pendulum and it'll swing back to them at some point in time. But they're terrified of the duopoly being broken up, and that's exactly what the Liberal Democrats are trying to do, along with others, is to actually challenge that duopoly and maybe head more towards what we see in a lot of European countries, where actually most of the time it is a minority government. The government in its own right doesn't actually have the majority in the lower house to form government. They have to form coalitions, form coalitions in order to do that. So this change, like I said before, government is a symptom of us. How do you think Australians are going to respond if they start to see minority government? We have this memory of minority government under Gillard, and we had Rob Oakeshott and so forth, and it was a circus. The whole thing was a circus. Are we trying to sell them something that they think they don't want? How do you think the people of Victoria, are they going to change their votes?
Yeah, look, I think that's a really interesting question, and I probably, my going position is I'm not sure that I know, but more I'd say this, that, and I've been saying it throughout the last 3 months as I go around and talk to groups and talk to the media, and and it goes back to what I was saying about this being a very important election. You know, I just say to people, get to know the people that you're voting for.
Yeah.
You know, the biggest problem I think we have is we're putting up people who are duds. You know, look, we haven't talked about this. We've got, in the Labor Party, my criticism forever has been that it's people who've never had a real job. They've been to uni, they've been a union official, they've been a ministerial staffer, and then they've become a politician. But sadly, then you go to the Liberal Party. So my local member here, you know, is an example. But these people have been to uni, worked for a peak business group, been a ministerial staffer, become a politician, and they really are clueless when it comes to what business is about, and you know, not being, I suppose, in a position where you've got absolutely assured security of income. You know, so when Scott Morrison says we're all in this together back in the early stages of the pandemic, you know, you go, no, we're not, mate. Don't even dare to say that. Yeah. So and Frydenberg saying, oh, business is going to hibernate. Well, it's been a long hibernation, Josh.
Yeah.
2 years, mate.
Yeah.
2 years.
Not even bears.
Anyway, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it just showed his colossal ignorance. It's just disgusting. So the point I'm making is that's who we've been electing, and you've sort of been saying this. It's our fault. We have to know how to vote. We've got to understand how preferences work. We've got to look at. I'm suggesting to people in this election should look at all the minor parties in the independents. So your local House of Reps seat, and then the Senate. Look at the people. Look at what they're saying. Do they have a policy agenda, or are they just a one-trick pony? You know, are they a far right-wing nut job? Are they some secret commie? You know, like go and see them. Yeah. Pick up the phone. Ask to talk to them. If they won't talk to you, well, straight away if they after several calls or emails they won't even give you half an hour to come into their electorate office. Again, run for the hills. Yeah. So I think if we make better decisions about who we back, we'll get better people. That's the thing. As to Australia's appetite for coalitions like Europe, well, I think it's going to come, and we'll see how it works. But if we, you know, I thought Oakeshott was a deal, and I thought Tony Windsor was a grandstander, and you know, they weren't there through, you know, they were part of the problem, you know, and I don't think their electorates really liked what they did at the end of the day. I think that was...
Well, they were, I think, a symptom of and they were one of the reasons why the preferential voting system was changed, so that we no longer have party preferences being negotiated by the parties, but voters actually now have to put all their own preferences onto the ballot. My understanding is that change was in part a reflection of that. I might be wrong, but let me come back to what you were saying before about how people are always saying to the government, do something. There would be people watching who are sitting there going, yes, but if the government doesn't intervene, then it's all going to go to shit. You know, we're going to have endless problems, and no one's going to be out there fixing our problems for us. How do you and how do the Liberal Democrats respond to this idea that if the government doesn't do something, then no one will?
Well, I think it's like this, that, you know, they tried in the Soviet Union and even in China to have 5-year plans, a command and control economy. The government working out exactly what was going to happen and who was going to do what and what companies were, you know, going to be supported, if you like, and it failed. In the Soviet Union, for example, we talk about agriculture, it led in the 1930s to widespread famine, which of course they tried to cover up in millions of deaths. You know, in the Ukraine, for example, it doesn't work. Government doesn't have the capacity to actually properly plan or understand. All the sort of guidance I've seen in terms of the historical record shows that the best systems are ones that are, you know, a light-handed capitalist system where you've got a level of regulation to try and have level playing fields to make sure that people, you know, treat each other okay and pay their bills, and, you know, just you've got a framework that people all go, yeah, those are the rules, and let people get on with it. That gives great outcomes. So China, I mentioned them before, essentially what China did from when they really started to open up in the 1980s to a few years ago, they allowed that to happen. They allowed, you know, basically free enterprise within a Chinese system. Since, you know, President Xi's got to the top, that's changing, and I ultimately predict that will see China fail to perform economically in the same way, and it's a big mistake. So in this country, Every time we call for government intervention, we make it harder for people to employ people. We make it harder for people to start a business. We make ourselves less competitive in the world stage. You know, there's a darling of the renewables sort of sector in Australia called Tritium, a great company who are producing electric vehicle charging stations, fast chargers, and they have a plant where they manufacture here in Brisbane, just been listed on the NASDAQ, but their next plant is being built in the United States, and it's a mega plant. And if you say, well, why isn't it happening here? And well, it's not happening here because we have terrible IR laws, we have high wage costs, we have, and the high, because we've got terrible IR laws, even though we've got high wage costs, people can't manage and get productivity. So I don't think employers in Germany don't mind paying a lot of money for skilled labour if they can actually manage the production of, you know, in their company. And we've got high energy costs. So when you add all that up together, I would venture to suggest people like Tritium are going to the United States to manufacture. We lose out. So, you know, that's why government really should be backing out. We should be letting people have a framework which is where it is easy to start a business, it is easy to employ people, and when necessary, easy to fire people, and we actually reward and incentivise that. So that's the way to go, and yet this country inexorably, and under a coalition government, has gone more and more the other way. And you know, COVID has really shown as well. Like, okay, very quick example, I hope this makes sense. So these clowns in their national cabinet said, we're going to have, this is back early this year, back in January, said, you've got to have these rapid antigen tests, and you know, these are the rules around that. And they said, we're doing this. They didn't have the test kits. So the logistics system fell apart. So the supermarket shelves looked like Soviet Russia. Their stuff was cleared because people were going, couldn't work. I mean, that just shows they just can't organise such a complex thing. Another one was the vaccine rollout in the early stages.
Absolute disaster.
It was a disaster because it was central command and control, rather than actually say, right, we're going to allow pharmacists and doctors and whatever, all these little places are going to register. They then should have been allowed to then draw on, you know, a logistics system that was set up to be flexible and actually feed them. And they then were the ones who tried to get people to come in to get the shot.
You made a lot of great points in there, and I just want to remind viewers the issue of overregulation, the cost of IR and, you know, council approvals and the cost of electricity. This is not just a thing that affects big business.
It affects us.
I know someone in Victoria who makes beef jerky, but in order to make beef jerky, it's classified as a small good, so to be allowed to sell it, he has to have the certified stainless steel kitchen. Now, he wanted to set that up to be mobile, so he set up a trailer. He rents his house, so he didn't want to put a stainless steel kitchen into his rented house. He's got a trailer. It's all been done properly. He's spent the money on buying the trailer. It's been professionally built. It's been over a year, and he still hasn't had the certification come through. Not because there's a problem with the trailer, but just because that's how long it's taking. In my case, some business partners of mine and I, we spent 3.5 years getting through council to get approval for a go-karting centre, and that was with the support of the council. The council actually voted and had a resolution. It was unanimous that they were in support of this project. It took 3.5 years to get through. Then we had to deal with an objection in VCAT, which was tens of thousands of dollars, and another 6 months. And then we ran straight into all of the COVID lockdowns. Now let's remember, COVID and the COVID lockdowns and the political reaction are different. COVID wasn't a huge problem for the business. We could have gone under construction. Lockdowns, big problem. We still haven't turned any soil. We've got all the approvals. We're ready to go. Now inflation has pushed up our cost of construction. We've got the whole thing was tendered. Now we need another investor, because 5 years of delays has pushed us to the point that inflation is now hurting us. It's just one thing after another, and it doesn't have to be.
Well, another one that I think people should think about as well is, you know, a cost of a new apartment. I mean, you know, the cost of a new apartment is being driven. You know, take a place like the CBD of Melbourne, a Dockland area, or Brisbane. You know, firstly the CFMEU with their iron grip on construction and those sort of parts of the world and high-rise buildings, you know, increase the costs significantly. You then got all these taxes and charges that government's levying. You know, you've got the council taking infrastructure charges because councils now have got into the business of a whole lot of stuff that they never used to do sort of 50 years ago. So they can't pay for all the things they need on the rates. So they're looking for more money all the time, more tax. So they say, oh, well, the developer's got to pay 30, 40,000, 50,000 per unit.
But it's not a tax on you, we're taxing the developer.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the fraudulence of politicians. And then GST is charged on the sticker price, which has that built in.
So tax
and
on
there's
tax.
also stamp duty, which is a tax. So there's taxes and taxes and taxes, and we all pay. You know, and everyone bemoans that housing is expensive. One final one is, you know, we then you know, rather than politicians push back and explain that the more yield, within reason, the more yield we allow developers, yes, there's more profits for developers, but it also means that the land component is reduced and again affordability is boosted. Well, no, not in this country. We want, you know, we don't like high rises, and you know, high rises equals slums, which is in the Brisbane experience, you know, is BS. The nicest, most, I suppose, sought after suburbs for the young and upcoming in this city are in places like West End, South Brisbane, Newstead, Tenerife, and they're high rises, you know, wall to wall, and everyone wants to be there because it's been done well.
Yeah.
So, you know, I guess I'm being a bit preachy there, but the bottom line is, you know,